Ally MacGraw was once Hollywood's bright-eyed symbol of purity, the woman whose face launched 1,000 posters after Love Story. But at 85, she finally reveals the truth she kept buried for decades: the horrifying reality of being married to Steve McQueen, the man the world worshipped as the king of cool, but who nearly broke her spirit in private. And her confession reshapes everything fans thought they knew about this iconic romance. Her rise into fame wasn't a glamorous climb, but a desperate escape from a childhood filled with shouting matches, insecurity, and a father drowning in alcoholism. Modeling became her lifeline, and under Diana Vreeland's sharp eye, she transformed from shy girl to fashion muse. A transformation that landed her the life-changing role in Goodbye, Columbus. Then the cultural earthquake that was Love Story, a performance that sent her career rocketing into Hollywood's stratosphere. She married producer Robert Evans, and for a moment it looked like the universe had finally given her peace. But fate had other plans, and they came roaring toward her in the shape of Steve McQueen on the set of The Getaway, whose presence hit her with a force she later described as chemical. The kind of raw energy that pulls you in even when every instinct tells you to run. And everyone else could feel it too. A magnetic storm shaking the production long before tabloids did. Their affair detonated the Hollywood scene, destroying her marriage to Evans and pulling her into McQueen's world where passion and danger sat side by side. She married the superstar in 1973, believing she was stepping into a storybook life, but instead she entered a prison of jealousy, control, and surrender. McQueen demanded a prenuptial agreement, demanded she quit acting, demanded she shrink herself so he could remain the center of gravity. And she obeyed because she was terrified of losing him, giving up her career just as she became one of the most sought-after actresses in the world. At home in Malibu, everything looked perfect from the outside, but behind closed doors, McQueen's demons surfaced: abandonment issues, insecurity, fury, suspicion, and MacGraw found herself tiptoeing through her own life, trying not to ignite his temper while ignoring the affairs he didn't bother to hide. She played homemaker to the hilt, cooking, cleaning, folding her ambition into a box labeled love, while McQueen drowned himself in alcohol, drugs, and adrenaline, disappearing for nights, returning explosive or silent. And she numbed her pain with drinking, sinking into her own spiral as the man she loved slipped further into chaos. By 1976, their marriage was collapsing under the weight of resentment and betrayal on both sides, and when she told McQueen she wanted to act again, just one step toward reclaiming herself, he responded by initiating divorce, confirming everything she feared from the start. Her dreams had never mattered to him. She accepted a role in Convoy, the final blow that ended their marriage in 1978. And only 2 years later, Steve McQueen died at 50 from mesothelioma, leaving her with grief so complicated she couldn't untangle it even decades later, admitting, "I wish we had both grown old sober," a sentence that still echoes with everything they lost. After his death, she tried rebuilding her life, but Hollywood had moved on, and her career drifted as she battled alcoholism of her own, until she finally entered treatment at the Betty Ford Center in the early 90s, a turning point that forced her to confront not only her addiction, but the emotional ruins left by fame, marriage, and heartbreak. Her 1991 memoir, Moving Pictures, exposed the truth with brutal honesty, and in 1994 she abandoned Hollywood entirely, retreating to Santa Fe where she found healing in sobriety, art, yoga, quiet mornings, and a life built on peace rather than fear. At 85, Ali MacGraw speaks with a clarity earned through fire. She doesn't demonize McQueen, doesn't romanticize him either, describing their love as both ravishing and ruinous, filled with breathtaking highs and horrifying lows, saying she's not a victim but a woman who survived one of the most intoxicating and destructive relationships in Hollywood history. Today, she uses her voice to empower women rather than silence herself for a man, and she admits that her memories of Steve McQueen still pulse with both tenderness and pain. A reminder that the world's coolest man could also be the one who left the deepest scars. Her story is no longer about the fairy tale people imagined, but about the truth she carried alone for decades. And revealing it at last is not revenge. It's liberation. And as she continued her story, the weight of those memories seemed to settle into her voice, because life with Steve McQueen didn't simply bruise her heart. It redefined her idea of fear, love, identity, and survival in ways she never fully understood until long after he was gone. And she explained how the world saw a rugged, irresistible Hollywood icon. But inside their home, she saw a man continuously at war with himself. A firestorm of insecurity, jealousy, and explosive control that could turn a peaceful morning into a battlefield. And Ali said there were days when she would wake up and study his face before he opened his eyes just to guess what version of Steve she would get that day. The tender man who held her close and whispered about escape from the chaos of fame, or the raging storm who accused her of betrayals she never even imagined, because Steve's jealousy wasn't simple. It grew out of a lifelong fear of abandonment that had been carved into him since childhood, and Ali bore the full weight of that fear as he demanded her constant presence, her constant reassurance, her constant obedience, and she admitted that the world never knew how often she cried behind locked doors as Steve paced outside, demanding answers to questions she didn't understand, like who she talked to, why she looked a certain way, or why someone on set had smiled at her. And she told how McQueen's darkness wasn't only emotional, because he could shut her down with a glare so sharp it felt like a slap. And even though he rarely touched her physically in anger, his words could slice deeper than anything a fist could manage, leaving her shrinking smaller and smaller inside herself as she tried everything to calm the storms he carried. But nothing was ever enough. Not her love, not her devotion, not her willingness to disappear into his world. And she revealed for the first time that there were moments she considered walking out into the night and never returning. But fear kept her still. Not fear of his violence, but fear of losing the fragile parts of him she loved. The wounded little boy buried beneath the legendary toughness, and she said she spent years trying to fix him, to heal him, to understand him, not realizing she was breaking herself in the process, losing her voice, her confidence, her identity piece by piece until she couldn't recognize herself in the mirror. And she described the loneliness of being married to someone adored by millions, but unable to reach him even when he sat right beside her, because fame built walls around Steve that no one could climb, and the pressure of being Steve McQueen made him suspicious of everyone, including her. And she recalled one horrifying night when he shattered a glass against the wall during an argument, and she realized then that love was no longer enough to keep them safe inside that house. But she still stayed, hoping he would soften, hoping he would find peace, hoping the love they once shared would return. Yet instead, things grew tighter, harsher, more suffocating, until she reached a breaking point the world never saw, a moment when she finally understood that loving someone who refuses to heal will drown you both. And she gathered the strength she didn't know she had and walked away, even though the world judged her, even though journalists twisted the story, even though some fans blamed her for abandoning a man they worshipped. But now, at 85, she said with quiet clarity that leaving Steve McQueen saved her life. And she spoke about the guilt she carried after his death. The guilt of wondering if she could have saved him, helped him, changed him. But age finally gave her the wisdom to understand that love cannot cure a broken soul. And she admitted that she still thinks of him sometimes, not with anger, but with a profound sadness for the man he might have become if he had learned to trust love instead of fighting it. And she said the reason she speaks now is not to blame him, but to free herself and maybe help someone else trapped in a beautiful nightmare. Because behind the glamour, behind the movie posters, behind the legend, there was a man drowning in ghosts and a woman trying to love him without losing herself. And she wants the world to know that healing is possible, that standing up for yourself is possible, that leaving is possible, and that silence, no matter how long it lasts, can finally be broken, even after decades of pain. And with her voice steady, she ended by saying that the greatest lesson she ever learned wasn't about fame or love or sacrifice, but about the courage it takes to walk away from someone everyone else calls a hero when staying would destroy everything you are. And she hopes that by telling her truth at last, someone listening will finally find the strength to tell theirs. And as Allie looked back one final time, she admitted that healing didn't come quickly, but slowly through reclaiming her voice, her freedom, and her sense of self, because surviving Steve McQueen's shadow meant learning to live in her own light again. And now, at 85, she shares her truth not out of bitterness, but to remind others that escaping a painful love is not weakness. It is the first real step toward becoming whole again.